Hey, DBJ, we're going to talk about cinematic role playing again, and three ways you can mix and match, and the types of cinematic role playing you can do. All right, for my opinion, the three types are dramatic, meaning using role playing and incorporating the emotional impact of how your character feels, what's motivating them, and how are they acting and reacting to the situation. The second part is environmental, using every part of the environment that your character is involved in, whether it's a social interaction or especially combat, and using all those elements. And the last part is building the scene, using not just using the emotion and the physical parts, but building upon what your character interacts with. All right. So let's go with the first part. An example would be you have a knight, Ariana, and she's surrounded by the goblinoids. And in this scene, she describes herself. I kneel down, closing my eyes, draw my sword, and place the blade into the ground, both hands upon the hilt, talking wordlessly to myself as the goblins surround me. And then I draw my sword and cut them down as they approach, or something like that. Okay, so maybe it might not be dramatic in terms of the physical actions, backflipping, sliding across tables, those kind of things, but it could be a dramatic tension where there's an emotional response. I would point you guys to the live session of Within the Ring of Fire, and the very first game of Hell and Back. I'll try to post a link down at the bottom here to it, and how the PCs, the catalysts in that game are drawn into it on an emotional level, not so much the physical part. In that game, great session, and it wasn't very combat heavy, wasn't a lot of roll initiative, roll dice, what's your defense, nothing like that. But you really got a sense of the emotional progression and gravity that each character had. All right, so and you're playing cinematic when you want to add a lot of cinema to it, and especially think about the movies that you really love. Sometimes there's a good movie will have a very great emotional impact. I'll bring up, just saw The Equalizer, and I was making fun about how The Equalizer is like Man on Fire Part 2. And everyone knows that when Denzel's kicking ass in a Ring of Fire, in Man on Fire and in The Equalizer, you get this impression of how in Man on Fire, the girl gets kidnapped, and the only thing you're thinking is about, this dude's about to kick some ass. And we all know he can do it, but that emotional spark to get his quote-unquote character to start on his journey is what motivates the character, and why we justify his actions in that movie. And the same thing can be done cinematically. We like to poke the paladin a lot in D&D as to when the paladin wants to do something that's questionable. Everyone around the table has their own opinions about why or why not the paladin is allowed or not allowed to do something and break their code of conduct. But a large part of the explanation of that could be the emotional context. I'll give you an example. You've got the orc children and pregnant orc ladies. This is a situation, it's real typical, it's been around 30 years or more. And Paladin goes in a room and does the typical, I detect evil and I slay everything that's evil. Well, we all know how much of a robot and how thoughtless that is, but there could be an emotional context to it. Here's how I would explain it if I was playing the character and I felt that I was right in committing these crimes. It could be that the character playing that paladin would feel that killing these children and the pregnant orc women is wrong, but it is the duty of the paladin to do so, because having that guilt and that harm and forcing other quote-unquote innocent party members and people to commit such heinous acts would be wrong in their eyes, and that maybe this paladin feels that their duty is to accept that guilt. Their duty is to sacrifice their soul. That their duty is to commit. Their duty is to commit the heinous act, so that others do not have to make those choices and sacrifice their own humanity. Okay, so now we're going to go on to using the environment. Now this is the fun part. Using the environment. You're Ariana the Knight is surrounded by the orcs. She's in an abandoned castle, and the orcs and the chieftain are there at the dining room table. And so when she fights, she's blocking with her shield and swinging her sword, and then kicks over a chair to block two of them that are trying to corner her. And then she swings her sword at a stanchion or a torch stuck into the wall, wedged into the wall, and has it fall down. And then she grabs the torch and uses it to drive off the dire wolves that they use as pets or something like that. Picks up the carcass of the dead beast, roasted dead beast that's on the table, and throws it into the chieftain's face and whatnot. And these are all things, rolling across the table, pulling down the tapestry, slamming a door into someone's hand and things. These are all elements that, as myself as running a game, would not add extra difficulty, but to me, according to fifth edition, I'd give those players that are playing that way advantage or inspiration, because they're using the environment, they're being descriptive, they are doing things that, because of the environment around them, utilizing it, creating a very cinematic method of fighting, and it's not always block, strike with sword, block, strike with sword. To me, those beats, those are like dance beats, would happen in between the combat. If anyone remembers the original Red Box First Edition, around in Dungeons and Dragons used to be a minute long. It used to be 60 seconds long. And, you know, a lot can happen in 60 seconds if anybody's watched a UFC fight. But according to the impression I got from the original Dungeons and Dragons for fighting, having a round last 60 seconds, is that both sides are going back and forth, trying to find their way in. Maybe there's nicks and scratches, there's dodges, they're breathing heavy, and then finally somebody is able to strike forth, boom, get a good hit in, and all that simply is rolling a 20-sided, adding their bonuses, figuring out what the damage is. I look at cinematic combat and cinematic playing the exact same way. That the rolling across the table and picking up a fork and throwing hot grease into someone's face and pushing somebody back on the hot coals and all those kind of things are just little beats in a dance of combat, and allows that person to get that really good strike in. Something that I do, and this isn't technically a house rule, but I don't start page flipping to try to figure out how much damage, say, hitting somebody with the hilt of their sword does, or how much damage happens when they fall into a fire or something like that. I err in defense of the player by having them utilize their highest skill and highest damage potential, no matter what the special effect is. And I know that sounds kind of strange, because I know there's some rules lawyers out there going, well, if you use the hilt of your sword, that's technically maybe a club or fist load, and that doesn't do as much damage as a long sword. And to me, that's just being nitpicky. And what happens when you do things like that is it crushes player creativity. To me, it ruins a cinematic, enjoyable routine of a back and forth between your NPC creatures and city guards and prison attenders or executioner, and your players trying to escape, and knowing that you don't want the players to kill the guards, but you make it more difficult for them to do so making the characters fall back into a simple routine of wanting to, I strike with my sword, I block with my shield again. Lastly, it's building the scene. And building the scene means building upon the very last thing that happened and adding to that very scene. So an example would be Ariana surrounded by the orc tribe, the chieftain sitting in the throne room. She breaks her bonds. She draws her sword. She's got righteousness on her side. She swings, slays 2 of the orcs, and they fall down. Okay, so then the orcs fall in, and me as a game master, I say the closest orcs draw their weapons. The others around the room ready themselves, pulling weapons off the walls. One grabs a torch, and the chieftain backing away, yelling at them to say, "Kill her, kill her." And then, as the player, building upon that scene, saying, "Okay, stepping over their dead bodies, I walk forward, using my sword threateningly, and calling forth the goddess of which Ariana worships, and telling them to back off, or they will all meet their fate," or something of that nature. And just building upon the scene and not ignoring the elements that are there. And lastly, I'm going to add this in there. Again, this isn't necessarily a home rule, but this is what I would use in 5th edition, and my old group, we used to do this all the time, and that is getting advantage or gaining inspiration. And I'm using this from 5th edition, but it can be used for any game where you get bennies for role-playing benefits, whether it's dice or chips or re-rolls or something of that nature, when a player plays weak. And I don't mean a weakness, but playing weak. So, for example, Ariana, the knight, gets backslapped by the ogre that rushes into the ancient throne room, and she's got 35 hit points in. Game Master rolls. Well, you take 12 points. Well, whoa, that's a lot of damage. So the player, Ariana, says, "Well, the ogre hits me, and I slam against the wall, my head spinning, and I drop my sword upon the ground, not trying to catch my senses and being aware. I crawl away and try to hide under the table as I collect my senses from the staggering blow," or something. Okay, the game master, dungeon master, doesn't have to describe that. If the player describes that, how I play games and how my group used to play, is that we would incorporate, just as we wanted to be the best, have the spotlight, and kick ass, we would role play just as strongly the weakness part. Man, my character is injured. There's no way I would be able to carry 300 pounds of gear plus another 150 pounds of gold. I would drop something, and the gold's useless at this point. Just being able to go into those scenes, and the D&D 5th edition and plenty of indie games, everything actually back from Vampire that you could spend willpower to get an automatic success, and you'd gain willpower by role-playing a character. When you get these bennies, I always gave bennies for playing weak, dropping something, giving up an attack, telling the game master, "Hey, you know what, there's no way I would notice that. I just got my head knocked in. There's no way I would notice somebody, more orcs running into the room. I can barely hear anything. All I hear is a ringing in my ears." And so that the next action, they would get that bonus. They'd get to roll those 2d20 according to D&D 5th edition. And this takes a lot of trust, too, with a game master or dungeon master, flame tender, by allowing the players to play weak. The game master does not, quote-unquote, take advantage of the situation. Yes, tell the story. Yes, they may be captured. Yes, they may be, ropes may be tied over them, a net thrown over top of them, or the orc chieftain may order the ogre to grab Ariana by the throat and hold her up against the wall or something like that, or drag her by her foot from under the table. But those are role-playing elements. But as a game master, I would never specifically take advantage and hose a player specifically because they decide to play weak. To me, that's a story element. I always fall back on, would I read this in a book? Would I see this in a movie? Would I watch this on TV? And if it makes it that more compelling, that much more memorable, if this is something that I know I'm going to talk about next week and week before and recount to other people, then I absolutely want to see it and I want to encourage it in my game. So anyway, there's 3 types of cinematic role playing. I'm not sure how helpful it was, but I thought I'd do a video about it. So thanks for all the attention, guys out there. Thanks for the subs. I really appreciate it. I love all the comments you guys hand me, and I love the support. So again, thank you very much, and always be creative. Don't be destructive, guys.